Thank you. No?
Recording in progress.
Good evening and welcome to this meeting of North Sydney Council. I extend a sincere welcome to the members of the public who've joined us in the gallery, and I will just acknowledge that Jerry Nolan's daughters, Emma and Sarah, are here tonight, and to the councillors and to those joining us online. Before we begin, I call on Councillor Nicole Antonini to give the acknowledgement of country.
On behalf of all present and those watching on webcast, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of these lands in which we meet and pay our respects to the ancestors and spirits past and present.
Thank you. We've had an application from Councillor Spencerley to attend tonight's meeting remotely. Is there a mover for that? Councillor Santa, seconded by Councillor Keane. All those in favour? And that is carried unanimously. Are there any disclosures of interest for items on the agenda? Councillor Carr.
Yes, non-pecuniary, non-significant. For item 10.9 on the agenda. Do I need to say anything else?
The nature of your interest.
The Kirribilli Community Centre is named in the report and I chair that.
Thank you. Are there any other? Councillor Keane?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. 11.1, it's non-pecuniary, not significant, and it's the work with Destination New South Wales.
Thank you. This meeting is being recorded and made publicly available on Council's website. Those present should refrain from making any defamatory statements. By attending the meeting, you are giving consent to your image and voice being webcast. Councillors, council staff and members of the public must ensure that mobile phones are turned to silent during meetings of the council. Councillors who need to use their phone to text, talk or engage in social media activity must leave the chamber to do so. Councillors, that brings us to confirmation of the minutes of the last meeting. Is there a mover for those minutes? Moved by Councillor Santa, seconded by Councillor Antonini. Is there any discussion? Councillor Keane.
I'd just like to make a note that Mr McDonald on item 11.3 was asked to leave the meeting by yourself, Mayor. Is that an expulsion from the chamber?
It was for an act of disorder.
So is that minuted in the minutes to say that Mr McDonald was asked to leave? Does that normally get?
Yes, it's in the code of meeting practice. You're required.
It's not in the minutes.
Okay,
so we need to make the amendment.
Will the mover, Councillor Santa, take on that it needs to be corrected? Thank you. And the seconder?
Thank you.
With that correction, we'll put the minutes. All those in favour? And that is carried. Councillors, there's been application from a member of the public to speak on 3 items. 10.5, consultation on reforms to council meeting practices. 10.10, the tender on the supply, delivery, installation, commissioning and maintenance of gym equipment for the North Sydney Olympic Pool. And 11.1, the notice of motion 6 of 25, Rugby World Cup 2027, opportunities for North Sydney Council. Is there a procedural motion? Councillor Beregi.
Thank you, Mayor. I move that we bring forward items 10.5, 10.10 and 11.1 and open the public forum to debate those items.
Is there a seconder? Seconded by Councillor Santa. I'll put the procedural motion. All those in favour? And that is carried unanimously. So before we turn to those brought forward items, it is with a great deal of bittersweet sadness that I take you to Merrill Minute 1. And that is the Vale for Jerry Nolan, who passed away on the 31st of January of this year. And as I said, we're honoured to have his daughters, Sarah and Emma Nolan, here tonight. For much of his life in North Sydney, Jerry lived in Kirribilli and in the later part of his life at the James Milson Retirement Village. Jerry lived a large life marked by great energy, charm and generosity. He was exceptionally generous with his time for the North Sydney community over many, many decades, both as a citizen and then later as mayor. In my view, his legacy helped shape so much of what we hold dear in this community, the spaces and places for people, and particularly those for children. I won't read all of the Vale, and I owe a debt of gratitude to Emma Nolan, but also to Dr. Ian Hoskins for the preparation of the Vale. But I will turn to some of it and concentrate on his relationship with this council in various roles. In 1972, Jerry attended a meeting at this council in these chambers about the problem of what was then called latchkey children. I think it's many decades since anyone's talked about latchkey children. They were children like me whose parents worked and they came home and let themselves in after school. He told council's oral history project, I was the only bloke there. That led to Jerry becoming the driving force in establishing the North Sydney Creative Leisure Centre. The North Sydney Creative Leisure Centre hosted before and after school care for latchkey kids. But I would say, having grown up in that period in North Sydney, that it was pretty much most of North Sydney's children went through those doors. And for those of us who experienced it, including Jerry's daughters, it was an utterly magical, raffish and very slightly wild place for kids. And Jerry was at the heart of that fun and magic. Almost every child who played there will remember the flying fox that Jerry built. It was strung between the two old fig trees, one of which is still there today, and the sense of freedom, controlled chaos and creativity. The North Sydney Leisure Centre had recycled paper, it had boxes, fabrics, clothes, egg cartons, paint, chalk. Every child was encouraged to be creative in their own way. So whether you were a relatively shy person like me through to the wildest and most extrovert, there was something in that centre to capture you and often to challenge you. But like every North Sydney story, this magical place was threatened by the spectre of overdevelopment. And in those early 70s, Sabimo, a developer, planned high-rise buildings and a plaza on the site of the Creative Leisure Centre and on the rest of the land that is now known as Tedmack Civic Park. The building that the centre occupied had been an old senior citizens hall, and now, thankfully, it is the home of the North Sydney Community Centre. It was to be demolished and give way to towers and plazas and flats. Jerry wrote an article opposing the centre called the North Sydney Civic Heart Action Report, which he circulated to then known as progress associations and media outlets. And I think it's worth quoting a statement that Jerry made in that report, where he said, the basic requirements of a civic heart are the grouping of community services such as family planning, marriage guidance, baby health, childcare and preschool facilities, library, creative leisure, senior citizens, and a problem centre together with theatres, halls and civic meeting places, coffee shops, wine bars, sandwich shops, all arranged in such a way close to the existing church and sporting facilities that visitors to the civic heart will be encouraged to relax and to become involved. And that term, which was a hallmark of my childhood, certainly, give North Sydney a heart, became a slogan for the campaign opposing the development. And the campaign was ultimately successful, and the council voted against the development proceeding on that public land. And indeed, we owe the continued existence of that civic precinct of Tedmack Park and the North Sydney Community Centre, the Ros Crichton Pavilion, to those passionate, persistent residents who campaigned to keep the land in community hands and to prevent that development. And I'm going to skip a bit, in 1991, Jerry was, and it was after the defeat of Robin Reid, who's another North Sydney legendary resident, in the then state election, Jerry was persuaded by Tedmack to run as mayor. And he was directly elected in 1991 and he held office until 1995. And remarkably, he had not been a councillor before that time, but he had been exceedingly active in the heart, really, of local of issues that faced North Sydney. And he continued Ted Mack's campaign to calm traffic in local streets. 50-kilometre-an-hour zones were introduced, the first in the state, and yet Jerry hated speed humps. His interest in transport led to the boss of the State Transit Authority every 6 weeks or so. I think that was probably a hallmark of my, what do you call it, not reign, my time as mayor. Jerry wrote during his time as mayor a weekly column for the Mossman Daily, and he expressed his views and explained the decisions of council. And he relayed council successes, and sometimes he questioned the processes. And not all the topics were parochial. In June 1993, he made the case for flexible working arrangements, arguments that resonate today. In June 1995, he urged local residents to support the international movement to ban landmines. So Jerry was always a supporter of innovative thinking, and I'd say creativity throughout his life. And he even raised the possibility then of introducing electric cars to North Sydney Council in 1991. And here we are 30 or 40 years later with a fleet beginning to emerge. He supported the idea of open government, but he ended an interview to Council's historian Margaret Park in February 2000 and said the following: "You can create all the right environment, all the right procedures, the protocols you like for open government, but at the end of the day, people are going to have to get off their bums themselves and do something." Shortly before he passed, Jerry's daughter Emma asked him what he felt were his best accomplishments during his time as mayor. And he said the bus lane on the Harbour Bridge and the big hub bus stop at Watson Street, Neutral Bay, and how they helped alleviate traffic congestion to keep people moving. He was always proud of being a very active founding member and the Northern Region Director and Deputy Chair of the local government recycling cooperative, having recycled drink bottles himself all those decades earlier in rural South Australia. I think the hallmark of his life was a great deal of generosity and participation and service to many communities, but particularly this one. And I therefore recommend that Council acknowledge his contribution to North Sydney, particularly his legacy of championing public spaces and places for children in the community, that we write to Mr Nolan's family expressing sincere condolences and gratitude for his service to our community, and that we commemorate his contribution by planting a tree with a commemorative plaque in a suitable location in consultation with Mr Nolan's family, and that Council liaise with the North Sydney Community Centre and seek to name the children's playground there, the Gerald Nolan Adventure Playground, in recognition of his vital role in creating that space. That last was a request of his family, and I think it's a particularly fitting one. And so for all those reasons, I urge you to support the motion. Are there any speakers? Councillor Keane.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I just want to acknowledge that last point. I think is an excellent recommendation to rename the playground at the community centre. It would also be nice if we could capture Give North Sydney a Heart somewhere and acknowledging Mr Nolan too, somewhere within some of these recommendations, because I think that is a very special legacy from an amazing man. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Berge.
Thank you, Mayor. That was a beautiful tribute. It's amazing when you read his contribution and what he lived through. You almost feel like we're living through it again ourselves here today. Again, councils are under attack. Public space is under attack. The very essence of community is under attack. And what they fought for was what we have today. And that is protected by various properties that the council holds as well. And that's why it is so important that even in tough times, council holds its line, becomes financially sustainable so that we can continue this legacy. And it is wonderful, the stories, Mayor, that you told, so personal. But that is what it's about. And if you read the history of the McMahon's Point Community Centre, you'll see exactly the same history of the community coming together, chipping in, and then gifting it to North Sydney Council's care and control. The stories are boundless, but this one is very special. And I'd like to thank you both for coming today, send you our best wishes, and thank you for lending your father to the community in such a magnificent way.
Thank you. If there are no other speakers, I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Thank you. And that is carried unanimously. Thank you. So in the good North Sydney tradition, that takes us back to the rest of the agenda. And the first item brought forward is 10.5, the consultation on the reforms to council meeting practices. There's one registered speaker, and that is Davey McDonald. If you would please come forward and address the council.
Hi, thank you, Mayor. Gosh, that's something to follow. Extreme. The reason I came and wanted to speak on this particular subject was to bring a localised focus to it. I think it's a great report that's going up to make some changes to the way that we conduct meetings. I think we can do it better. And one of the key things I took from the report when I read it was that council can formulate its own policy and arrangements for how it conducts meetings and forums. And it's to that I want to address. We've seen and experienced last week the disruption that occurred in the gallery. And I think one of the factors there is of the situation that we have where people do not consider that they're being engaged or being involved in decisions and having their voice heard. We need to address that issue, and that may be the way that we run these meetings. I think we need to recreate a sense of community, much as what we heard just a few moments ago. We have an issue where when we as members of the public come and address you, often we will go back and there will be imputes or things that we've said that are taken out of context, and we have no right to reply to that. We need a solution to that to actually stop that from occurring. That needs a change of the way we come together. Perhaps the situation is, and this is a suggestion, and I hope that some of you will take this away and consider it, that perhaps councillors first discuss the agenda item, and then people from the gallery then come and express themselves from pre-formulated ideas or those subsequently to what they've heard, and then councillors can come back and have a brief discussion amongst themselves, pass or reject or do whatever they want with it. The alternative to that would be that we keep the current system, and the current system needs to allow people in the gallery to be able to signify when they feel that a councillor has unfortunately taken something out of context or totally misrepresented what they've said, again, either directly or indirectly. It's about giving that opportunity and a right of reply. What would that look like? I don't know, but I think it's worthwhile having a workshop or consultation with the community to look at how we can better involve people in the public gallery. Right now, there are very few of us here, and I think that's indicative of something we need to do. The public has a right to express itself, orderly, of course, but then councillors don't have the right to gaslight and wind them up and cause a situation as well. It's both ways.
That's your 3 minutes if you just finish your thought.
I've done.
Okay, thank you. Thank
Wow, that's unusual.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Just some thoughts.
Thank you, councillors. Is there a councillor Berricky?
I'll move the recommendation, Mayor.
Is there a seconder? Seconded by councillor Santa. Is there any discussion? Before we,
Sorry.
thank you, councillor Keane.
Couple of things I would like to highlight. The section on public forums, it's been completely deleted apart from one clause. I really believe we should keep that. section for the public to have a right to say. As we mentioned, it was a very active meeting last meeting, and the public all had their say and everyone got their 3 minutes. They also deleted the term of applying to speak, that you can speak to a number of items. I think we should also keep that clause, allowing the public, like tonight, Mr McDonald is speaking to a number of different items. And then I think it's 9.1.87, councillors put questions directly, succinctly. They've deleted respectfully. I think respectfully could be reinstated. And just from my perspective, I support getting the moving the briefings to an open forum. I previously haven't, but I have moved and changed my position on this, except for confidential items, that is.
Thank you, councillor Keane. Are there any other speakers? Just before we do briefly, I'm just going to acknowledge that the purpose of this is a submission on the minister's suggested changes to the Code of Meeting Practice. Like councillor Keane, was a long-term, but have always been a long-term supporter of public councillor briefings, support some of these changes. The reality is, though, that once the minister makes a model code, we will then have to have a consultation on our new code, and we are able to go beyond. We are able to put, as long as it's consistent with the code, for example, the word respectfully. We are able to, and as we have done now, we are able to move beyond the very restrictive provisions in our current Code of Meeting Practice that would, for example, only permit 2 people to speak for or against any item. So there will be an opportunity for our community to be involved once again in formulating our code once the minister makes his decision and the model code is adopted for the whole of New South Wales. Thank you. Do you wish to do a right of reply? In which case I'm going to put the item. All those in favour? Those against? That's councillor Keane and councillor Carr against. That is carried. That takes us to the next item brought forward. 10.10, the tender for the supply, delivery, installation, commissioning and maintenance of gym equipment for the North Sydney Olympic Pool. Now, again, there is one registered speaker, Davey McDonald. And Mr. McDonald, if you address the council.
This is a follow-up to a previous presentation I did. And overall, I think this is not the time with the rate increases to be considering what must be a huge financial outlay on gym equipment. I calculate, having been a manager of a gym, been a personal trainer, boxing trainer, consider that you don't necessarily have to have, at this time, expensive equipment. The tenders that came in were over 6 months ago. There may be changes in any of them. I have no idea how much council is intending to spend on this, but we know as a community we are concerned at a time when our rates are being increased for a number of reasons, we are told. Then we're also faced with this. To lease to buy has lots of ramifications to it. What is the residual? 60%? Does that mean in 5 years' time we have equipment which is driven, much of it today by technology, is going to be out of date? Essentially, right now, or when the pool is finished, I say there is no need. I could quote you, I've got them listed here, 10 examples where you do not need massive amounts of expensive equipment to run wellness programs for the community. If you like, you can ask me what they might be. So, we need to consider the amount of equipment that you need to purchase to create enough redundancy in that equipment to make it a financial viability at peak times, because there are other times when gyms have very few people there. So that's an expenditure that you're being asked to consider right now, and an asset that will depreciate over time. We don't want to own the equipment. We should just be simply leasing it. But again, all this needs unfolding. And I also question, respectfully, the the qualifications, the experience of the people that appear to be charged with the delivery of this. Have they got the experience? I've looked at resumes and suggest that perhaps they don't. We do not want another situation that we've been faced with as a community that we are with the swimming pool. We don't want a 2.0, whether you agree or disagree, there was or there wasn't consultation. We need and deserve consultation on this. That's about it.
Thank you. Are
Thank
there any
you.
questions for the speaker? No, thank you. Councillor Berrigan,
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'll move the recommendation.
is there a seconder? Seconded by councillor Holding. Is there any discussion?
I'll just briefly speak. This is the second time this has come back because more information was sought. I assure you, Mr McDonald, that the council staff who have been tasked with running the pool are excellent, well credentialed and have done it before. I have utter confidence in the council staff that have been appointed, and I'm not sure that really criticising council staff here is an appropriate way to go. I have had my issues with the pool. This is an excellent report. The tender process has been thorough, and I ask councillors to support the recommendation.
Councillor Keane.
Thank you. Mr McDonald, you raised a very good point about leasing the equipment due to the expiry of it over a period of 5 to 6 years. So I just wanted to acknowledge that I think that was a good suggestion.
Thank you. Are there any other speakers? Councillor Carr.
Madam Mayor, on the leasing of the equipment, I have a question really. If we sign the contract now, do we then have to start paying for that equipment immediately, or do we have to wait, or can we wait until the pool is ready to open? And is that something that we can delay in spending money on?
Thank you. Sit down. Yeah, to you.
Through you, I'll
Executive.
pass the question to the director just so that we're clear.
Through you, Madam Mayor. So the equipment is subject to a 5-year lease. The lease payments don't start until we actually take possession and install the gym equipment, which would be, so the delivery of the equipment is on hold until the pool opens. And then once the equipment actually arrives on site, we start paying our lease once it's installed and commissioned.
Thank you. Are there any other speakers? Councillor Berrigan, do you wish to exercise?
No, thanks.
No. In which case I put the item. All those in favour? All those against? Carr and Keane and Spencerley? That is carried. That brings us to the final item brought forward. Again, there is a single speaker registered, and that is Mr McDonald. The matter is the notice of motion for the Rugby World Cup 2027 opportunities for North Sydney Council.
Councillors, I don't come up here lightly and make statements. If I come up here and make a statement and make a suggestion or whatever, you can be sure that I've researched what I've said and what I'm about to say and what I've said before. And there's an example of why we need a code of meeting practice where we have the right to reply. So, on the World Cup, that was decided on 12th of May 2022, and I find it interesting that it now comes before council at this time. I just have a reason where I think about that. Fact is that you're being asked to make some decisions that are already gone, and that is where the, let me read them to you, where the, I'm on the wrong one here. The grounds have already been selected for the quarterfinals, semi-finals, etc., etc. They're done. Allianz Stadium and the Olympic Stadium. Now, that's a no-brainer. There's nothing to discuss there. In terms of training as a facility, North Sydney Oval, well, there's nothing, any harm in that. But where the concern comes in, for me and for probably a lot of ratepayers, is we're now talking about suggesting upgrades to the Oval, when again at a time we want to put our hand out to the Minister for Sport for this, but we can't do it because we should have extra for the same reasons as we might do for the swimming pool. The fact of the matter is that it's basically all been decided. In terms of the round table, what's that going to look like? It's just a motherhood statement. You need something far more substantive to make decisions on. And in regards to making any upgrades to the cricket ground, to the Oval, again, as it did happen with the swimming pool, there needs to be public consultation. And we don't need to go into swimming pool 2.0. So I say that just reject this. I mean, you accept the item of, in terms of they could use it as a training facility, but there are grounds that the rugby league have and the union clubs, which is probably far superior to what we may be able to provide. We've acknowledged that by saying we want to go and get a grant. We don't want a grant for this. We might want a grant for the Oval per se, but it's like I said when we were talking about asset management, it's a nice one to have. It's not necessary. And as for the round table, that to me sounds like a motherhood statement. What does that really mean? Again, involve the community. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Berge, it's your motion.
Thank you, Mayor.
The
I'll move.
movement.
Yes, please.
Is
Thank
there
you.
a seconder? Seconded by Councillor Santa. Councillor Berge.
Thank you, Mayor. This is a really, really exciting opportunity, and everything hasn't been determined. The purpose of the motion is to get council starting with some conversations, having had the announcement made of the Rugby World Cup and where the games will be, and the timeframe. In terms of the upgrades to North Sydney Oval, I think everybody who has seen North Sydney Oval knows that it is desperately in need of upgrades, especially the change rooms. We're not the only people that think that. Cricket think that, rugby think that, rugby union think that, AFL think that. They are atrocious for women, and they are not up to standard. And what this seeks to do is to say we would like to consider offering the Oval as, excuse me?
Sorry, Councillor Berge, you have the floor and I'll call the gallery to order.
It seeks to use North Sydney. North Sydney is in a fantastic position, always has been. The Metro just makes it even better. It brings enormous business opportunities to the North Sydney area, and it's a win-win-win for meetings to be held and upside with absolutely no downside. So I encourage you to support the motion.
Thank you. Are there any other speakers? Councillor Santa.
Thank you, Mayor. I support this motion and I applaud Councillor Berge for this initiative. It shows the strong connection between major sporting events and tourism, including in this case inbound tourism, with rugby supporters worldwide expected to come here and through their spending increase revenue for our local businesses. This is another example of the work this council is doing to enhance the prosperity of our local business community. It will demonstrate what a magnificent resource we have here in North Sydney with our beautiful North Sydney Oval. I wish we had a less prosaic title than North Sydney Oval for it, which I used to consider it to be one of the world's prettiest cricket grounds. I was not doing it justice. This World Cup will show that it is also the world's most beautiful rugby ground. I strongly support this initiative and call on the council and our North Sydney community to get behind it and do everything we can to ensure our contribution to both these World Cup meetings, the men's and the women's World Cup in Australia, are successful. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other speakers? Councillor Carr.
No, you go. You go to mine. You're on first.
Okay. Yes, thank you, Madam Mayor. I'd like to move an amendment to the motion to remove item 1, which is hosting live sites, including North Sydney Oval for the quarterfinals, semi-finals and final. As Councillor Beregi said, and we have heard many times from staff, that our facilities at North Sydney Oval are not good. And therefore, trying to host international events at North Sydney Oval at this time is probably not warranted.
So just
because-
before you do, you've moved an amendment. Is there a
Yes.
seconder for your amendment, councillor Keane? The amendment is to delete the first, the first
First item.
bullet point.
Number 1.
Which is in the first bullet point in item 1.
Yes.
So I'm asking the mover, are you prepared to take that on? No, thank you. So councillor Carr, you can speak to your amendment.
Yes, well, as I was saying, I think the North Sydney Oval requires significant improvements in order to host international games. Given our current financial position and the fact that we're still dealing with the pool, I don't think this is the time to undertake a large renewal project on the North Sydney Oval for this particular event. Thank you.
Councillor Keane, are you speaking in support of the amendment?
Yeah, I'll speak in support of the amendment. I agree with you. The asset needs a lot of money and contribution, and at this time, when we're facing a significant rate rise as well, is not the time for a council to be spending money or on the Oval. We do need to seek federal, state funding to support us, or even with Cricket Australia or some of the sporting codes. So we certainly need to look at renewing this asset. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any, councillor Holding?
Yeah, I just would speak against the amendment. I mean, the hosting of live sites is very different to hosting pool games. And I support the original motion predominantly because it's forward-facing. It's looking towards the Women's 2029 as well. It's looking towards getting facilities up and running for future events, but using 2027 as a starting block for that process. In terms of the it's really a round table and a discussion. It's the starting point to something much, much bigger. And I think for that, it deserves support. So I don't support the amendment.
Thank you. Are there any other speakers on the amendment? I'm going to put the amendment. All those in favour? Those against? The amendment is lost. That returns us to the debate on the motion. Are there any other speakers? Councillor Keane.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Destination New South Wales are doing some really good work around Vivid, and I suggest when you're in your round table and you're having your discussions with them that you talk to them about the campaign they're currently running with local businesses to capitalise upon Vivid. It is a very clever marketing campaign where businesses can actually express their interest to be involved in the Vivid period from May to June, and if we could look at something similar like that for our local businesses to capitalise upon a fantastic event coming to North Sydney. I think we all agree we're thrilled to have it coming here into coming to Australia, and also ways that we can work with them for North Sydney.
Thank you. Are there any other speakers? Just before I give you your right of reply, I'm just going to speak very, very shortly. I'm supporting the motion. First of all, this isn't about us hosting actual games. It's about activating, particularly around our CBD and the metro, and it is entirely aligned with the recently adopted open space strategy, with the creativity and the culture strategy, and the economic development strategy, all of which have strategic directions that support exactly this sort of thing. The thing that I'm most pleased about is that this isn't about the council expending huge sums of money. It's about engaging with the sporting codes and the state and federal government. And these are the sorts of times and opportunities that we can take some support if it's available. So this is about exploring the opportunities here. It's not committing us to anything at this point. So thank you. Councillor Beregi.
Thank you, Mayor. Yes, I agree. This is about exploring. no expenditure, but it's about looking at the opportunities for our assets, which I think is a wonderful idea, because we should be trying to maximise them as much as we can. And now we have the metro and we have our CBD livening up. North Sydney is a stone's throw from the CBD and has great access throughout Sydney. And why wouldn't we go and talk to Rugby Australia and Destination New South Wales and any agency and engage with them and hold a round table with our businesses to see how we could help put together accommodation packages to support the North Sydney CBD and villages. I find it amazing that anybody would even think to vote against this when we have a wonderful facility. And if people look at it, it's magnificent. It needs some work, and federal and state funding may well come, because it's a federal announcement that the Rugby World Cup is coming to Australia, both the men's and the women, and I am really excited about that.
I'll put the motion. All those in favour and those against? That's Carr and Keane against. The motion is carried.
Councillor Spenceley was
And
against.
Councillor Spenceley
Sorry, I was for the motion.
was for the motion, which is what I called. Thank you. So that means we now move back to the rest of the agenda. That takes us to item 10.1, matters outstanding. Councillor
Would you
Berrigan.
like to attempt to move some on Globo? Procedural motion.
Wish. Perhaps if you, as the mover of an items by exception, read through the list, and if I'd call upon councillors who wish to speak for or against or vote for against any of these items, if you would identify them so that we may pull them out.
Thank you, Mayor. I propose to move 10.1, 10.2.
I want to speak
Yep,
to that.
that's
yeah.
fine. 10.3,
Speak to that.
10.4,
I'm speaking.
10.6, 10.7, 10.8, 10.9, not 10.9, and 10.11.
So those items, for clarity, everyone, are that depending on a seconder, councillor Berrigan is moving a procedural motion, which is that the council accept the recommendations in items 10.1, 10.6, 10.7, 10.8 and 10.11. Is there a seconder for that, councillor Holding? I'll put the procedural motion. All those in favour? And that is carried. That means that the recommendations in the reports attached to each of those items has been adopted by council. That then takes us back to item 10.2. Is there a mover? Councillor Welsh.
I move the recommendation.
Is there a seconder? Councillor Antonini. Councillor Welsh, you wish to speak to the item?
The quarterly financial report makes it clear a special rate variation is not just an option, it is a necessity. If we are to continue delivering the essential services and infrastructure our community expects. While no one takes rate increases lightly, the SRV is necessary to secure our financial stability and deliver the projects our community values. Thank you.
Thank you. There, Councillor Santa, you wish to speak?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I note that council through its WISE investment program with greater than average yields, deferral of non-essential capital works, income from commercial properties, and item 10.9 goes into great detail on that issue. And the $10 million new loan we have, and some possible asset sales, which council will perhaps consider at a later date. Through these techniques, council has adopted a judicious mix of investments, works deferrals, and a new loan to ensure we maintain our liquidity, while the unrestricted current ratio and the operational performance ratio are below the Office of Local Government's benchmark. They're both improving, and this should continue with these policies. However, this council faces ongoing liquidity issues, including declining revenues from secondary but important revenue sources, especially parking and hoarding fees, and from our commercial properties. Incidentally, I note that this is not a large portfolio, our asset portfolio, but around $54 million, comparing with neighbouring councils which have much higher asset levels than ours. And much of this is office space with weak demand. Therefore, sales of this asset would not yield a high return at this, as the way things are currently on commercial property stakes. So all these things are unlikely to improve, and this is an ongoing problem we have to address. Even with the additional loan of 10 million, this is not going to be solved unless we address the income from our major source of revenue, namely rates.
Thank you. If you could turn off your microphone. Are there any other speakers? Councillor Carr.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I have a number of questions on the budget. The net operating result improved to 3.39 million, which is encouraging. But the report shows that the net operating result was $4,270, and the shortfall should really be, well, that it was negative 4,270, but looking at the numbers, the shortfall is only 821. So I'm not sure I understand the financials here, how they were worked out.
So Councillor Carr, is that a question that you put to the CEO?
Yes, please.
Thank you. You take your seat.
Through you, Madam Mayor, I would have to get reference to the figures that you're quoting, Councillor Carr, to be able to answer your question.
Would you like to continue?
Can you refer to a page that you're referring to a figure? You were talking about 4,000.
Yes, it's, well, I'll have to bring it up. It's in the financials. So,
Through you, Madam Mayor, may I ask, are you talking about the 4.2 million as opposed to thousands, or?
well, it's the net operating result on the.
Through you, Madam Mayor, I believe you're talking about page 11, which is the net operating result from all operations, which includes capital income.
Yes.
And typically our performance is measured on net operating result before capital items, which is a negative 5.4 million.
Thank you. That have
The
you?
number is what to say?
That's the answer to the question. So would you like to continue? Do you have anything? You need to take your seat, your feet.
Yes, I have more. I also, the report from the financial, from the accounting officer says that in his opinion, the council's projected financial position as of 30th of June 25 will be satisfactory. And it has been based on the following factors. That
I have to ask you under the code of meeting practice to ask a question directly, succinctly, and on the item. So if you could be direct and succinct with your question.
okay. One of the reasons that the financial officer says that was that a special variation application has been lodged to address the long-term financial position. Given that we don't have a decision by IPART, how do we make a statement that says, well, this will address our financial position?
Through you, Madam Mayor, the Chief Financial Officer has made that statement on the basis that the special rate variation process is the process that we undertake to address our liquidity position in year 2. As we get to the end of June, as the report has indicated, with the additional $10 million in loan funding, 30th of June, we will be okay to pay our bills. But following that, It is on the basis, on a long-term perspective, it's on the basis that our revenue increases, and that is her disclaimer in her statement.
Thank you. Councillor Keane.
Thank you. Councillors, please note a couple of things I'd like to highlight in this report. The deficit was decreased by $1 million to 5.5 million, primarily due to the savings from council holding vacant roles to assist the liquidity of $1 million and an increase in revenue from financial investments, another $1 million, and increased other income, $300,000. This was partially offset by a $2 million loss in user charges from the hoarding fees and the parking station income, which Councillor Santa has alluded to or spoke to. I agree. I had the same question as Councillor Carr regarding the acknowledgement of the special rate variation in the Responsible Accounting Officer's report. From my perspective, if we don't have the budget to maintain the assets, I stand in my position that we look to sell some of our assets. We talked about it at the last meeting. There are some, I think Councillor Spenceley talked to the Easy Mart, that could be considered. Also, JC Decaux stood here on Monday, the 10th of February and indicated they have 33 approved sites for electronic advertising, which can bring revenue to council. Why are we not actioning this?
Sorry, I have to correct you. They said there were 33 sites under the tender. There are no approved sites.
There's 6.
With planning. There are 6, but there aren't 33.
But there is an
sites.
option for 33.
The option is subject to development consent. So let's just stick to the facts.
Okay, well, that's from my understanding. Well, there were sources of advertising income there as well. Consultancy fees. We have spent nearly $1 million on consultants. We would really like Chief Executive Officer to understand a breakdown of the actual $1 million or $214,000 spent and accounted for on consulting fees. If we could actually have a breakdown, that would be great. And look, I'm going to talk to the commentary of lost parking revenues. Of course, the parking meters were unusable for a period of time. Of course, we're going to have a loss. And why don't we look at a campaign for people to use our car parks or just sell off Ward Street? We need to do something to rebuild.
Thank you. Are there any other speakers? Councillor Berrigan.
Thank you, Mayor. I support both what Councillor Santa and Councillor Welsh said. I find it really difficult to read. Significant favourable adjustments are as a result of increased investment income, which is due to delays to improve and deferrals to improve liquidity, and $1 million in savings in employee costs during councils holding vacant roles. This puts enormous pressure on the staff that are already here. And we actually have an obligation to make sure that the council is functioning with staff that are in a very healthy workplace. And by having holding costs, employee costs and holding vacant roles to improve liquidity is just a position that is really quite shocking and one that I can't support, and is definitely a reason to proceed with a special rate variation. Yes, there have been losses. A lot of the losses is due to the metro. We know people, and it's part of council's policy to get people not to bring their cars into the CBD. That is the point of the metro. And this is why we need to look to alternative funding sources. So I go with the motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Welsh. Do you wish to give a right of reply?
No, it's okay.
I put the item. All those in favour? Those against? Councillors Carr, Spenceley and Keane. That is carried. That brings us to item 10.3, the Q2 review of the delivery program and operational plan. Councillor Welsh.
I support the recommendation. I move the recommendation.
Is there a seconder? Seconded by Councillor Santa. Do you wish to speak to the recommendation?
Yes, I do.
Thank you.
Just shortly and reiterate, a lot of this has already been said, but capital expenditure was less than the original budget. The actual expenditure was less than the original budget due to a delay and deferral of capital projects to improve council's liquidity. Staff year-to-date costs are less than the original budget. Staff costs are below budget due to the holding of vacancies to improve council's liquidity. Again, more evidence of the necessity for the SRV. I support the recommendation.
Thank you. Any other speakers? Councillor Keane.
Thank you. Madam Mayor. Councillors, I'd like to bring to your attention a couple of items. one of the items that is proceeding is to identify commercial opportunities on council's land and building assets. I commend that on the basis that they've written here through the report, the commercial property specialist is working closely to minimise vacancy rates of the council's commercial properties and ensure optimal occupancy of the commercial property portfolio. This should be a high priority revenue for the council that will alleviate the outrageous rate rise that has been proposed. 5.4.406. Review the employee value proposition and protocols. So Councillor Beregi, obviously we know the staff are under a lot of pressure. So why have we put that on hold? What does it mean, review the employee value proposition and protocols? We need to understand more about what that means for our staff. 44 staff left the organisation during the reporting period. That seems extremely high. Implement the Ward Street Master Plan, on hold. The ongoing review of the project's feasibility in light of changing commercial demand since the COVID-19 pandemic. If it's on hold, sell it. Alleviate this proposed rate rise and for our North Sydney residents.
Thank you. Are there any other speakers? Just before I give you the right of reply, I'm going to speak briefly. All of these financial reports speak to the heavy work that council has been undertaking internally before it ever turned to a special rate variation for to our community. And the continued cries for asset sales is clearly a philosophical difference between many of us on the council. And certainly from my view, we have an obligation under the Local Government Act to put intergenerational equity at the heart of all that we do. That's more and more demanding, particularly as we seek to address the impacts of climate change amongst other pressures facing this and the next few generations. We spoke about the legacy of Jerry Nolan and others, and certainly I can personally say a legacy of my own mother and her contribution to this community, and that was that we would not have the parks, we would not have the affordable housing, we would not have the things that make our community what they are and what they need if other generations of councils had just sold it all off, flogged it off. We know that there are developers circling every part of North Sydney, and no future generation could afford to ever recover the sorts of land and assets that we're talking about. And so for those reasons, I'm very pleased that the work that the council staff have done in putting together and the transparency that we now have as to exactly what is going ahead, what isn't, and why. So for all those reasons, I'm supporting the recommendation. Therefore, do you wish to exercise your right of reply? I put the item. All those in favour? And those against? Councillors Carr, Keane and Spencerley.
No,
Four. Okay. Councillors Carr and Keane. That brings us now to item 10.4. Investment loans and borrowings. Is there a mover for the recommendation? Moved by Councillor Beregi, seconded by Councillor Welsh. Is there any discussion? Councillor Carr.
Again, questions, if I may, Madam Mayor. The investment and loan report is shown, is not shown net of advisor fees. So can we get the new figures based on the net of advisor fees? Also, our investment portfolio seems to be underperforming, so can we take some action to improve that? Thank you.
Thank you. I assume they're questions on notice. I'll take them as questions on notice. Is there any discussion? I put the item. All those in favour? And those against? That's Councillor Carr and Keane. That is carried. That brings us to the final item on the agenda, 10.9, first and second quarterly commercial property portfolio report. Is there a mover for the recommendation? Moved by Councillor Beregi, seconded by Councillor Antonini. Do you wish to speak to it, Councillor Beregi?
No, thank you, Mayor. I'm happy to.
Okay. Is there any discussion? Councillor Carr.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Just a question regarding the Forsyth Park Scout Hall. it is leased to the Kirribilli Neighbourhood Centre. I just wonder, given that it is a community space, why does it make it on the list for commercial property for rent? And why is it identified there? None of the other community centres buildings are on that list. Thank you.
So point of order, Madam Chair, did you not declare a?
No, I'm going to call you to order. There was a non-significant, non-pecuniary interest declared, and that's a matter for each councillor. And in fact, it's in violation of the Code of Meeting Practice that even if there is a conflict, for anyone else to point it out. That's the state of New South Wales. Thank you. There's a question.
Through you, Madam Mayor, the community centre in question had a lease during the period of reporting, which is why it's highlighted in this report. If there's no lease transactions involving that community centre, they don't appear in this report. So when they do, they'll be in here, and when they don't, they will not be.
Thank you. Is there any discussion on the item? I'll put the item, all those in favour and those against. That's carried. That brings us to the close of the meeting. Thank you all for your participation, and we will be back here in 2 weeks' time. Thank you.